Hello, and welcome to my legislative report. I'm State Representative Julie Harhart of the 183rd District in Lehigh and Northampton counties. These days, kids face pressures and problems that either didn't exist or were very rare 20 and 30 years ago. With that in mind, I recently hosted an event at Northampton High School to make students more aware of threats such as cyberbullying, distracted driving, and human trafficking. I invited authorities in each of these areas to present information and facts, then answer questions that the students came up with. On this month's program, I want to share the presentation on human trafficking made by Northampton County District Attorney John Morganelli.
Good morning, everybody. I want to thank you for inviting me back. I also want to thank Mrs. Stoltz for organizing this today, today's discussion. Today we'll be discussing topics which are very important to each and every one of you, which would be human trafficking, driving under the influence, and cyberbullying. Human trafficking is one of the fastest growing criminal enterprises in the world. It is estimated that roughly 21 million people worldwide are suspected to forced labor or sexual exploitation, 27% of those who are children. And sadly, human trafficking is happening right here in Pennsylvania. You wouldn't think so. You think it's just mostly in your foreign countries, but no, it's happening all over. The General Assembly recently took action to address this terrible crime with the passage of new laws, which gives law enforcement the necessary tools to prevent and prosecute human trafficking. And it also provides additional protection for victims of human trafficking. The best thing each and every one of us can do is to learn more about this crime and report any suspicious behavior that you witness. You always can call the National Human Trafficking Resource Hotline, and I'll give you that number, and if you want to take it down, you can, and if you want to ask me for it again later, you may. It's 1-888-373-7888. Or you can text information to Be Free, which is 233-733, or contact your local law enforcement. So here with us today to talk about crime and human trafficking is Northampton County District Attorney John Morganelli. And this is the man who really does do a lot of the enforcement. We make the laws, and this is the gentleman who really enforces the laws and tries to keep our county, Northampton County especially, free from any crimes, right?
We try.
You try. John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Representative Harhart. First of all, it's a pleasure for me to be back here at Northampton High School with this fine panel and all of you students. And we hope to give you some information today on a crime that is something that should be in your mind and aware of. First of all, what I'd like to do is to start off by trying to describe a little bit about what we mean by human trafficking. And I'm sure in your high school classes you've studied about slavery. And slavery was an institution that was in our country not that long ago, really, in terms of human history or American history, but it was a very deplorable institution where individuals, human beings, were in bondage and performing labor and other services not of their own free will. And luckily we abolished slavery and we've moved forward. But human trafficking really in many respects is today's version of slavery, because what we're talking about is the exploitation of human beings. And by that what we mean really is where an organization, and these are criminal organizations, they can be very large organizations on a worldwide basis, or they can be smaller organizations that may just be in a small area, a city, a municipality, a county. But there are individuals who want to profit and make money by exploiting human beings. And so in Pennsylvania, we passed some legislation, thanks to Representative Harhart and others in Harrisburg, to address this problem. So what are we talking about? Well, essentially what we're talking about, compelling or coercing a person to perform labor or sexual services. And so when Pennsylvania adopted its law, it concentrated on those areas. And essentially we have two laws that are the primary laws that we enforce here. And that one it's called trafficking in individuals. And what that means essentially is that anybody who harbors, entices, cooperates with, maintains a person for the purpose of servitude, and I'll define that in a second, is committing a crime of felony crime of the second degree. And in Pennsylvania, a felony of the second degree is punished by 10 years in prison maximum or a $25,000 fine. So just being involved in the trade of human beings and exploiting them and keeping them for purposes of services, labor or sexual services, is a crime, and it's a very serious crime. If in fact we are involved with minors, because we have both adults, people who are over the age of 18, and minors who are under the age of 18 who are the victims of human trafficking. If it's a minor that is involved, it actually is a more serious crime, means it's a felony of the first degree, which carries with it a $25,000 fine or up to 20 years in prison. So you can see that the Pennsylvania legislature took this crime very seriously. The second statute that is relevant is the section that talks about involuntary servitude. And what that does is it actually defines involuntary servitude as subjecting someone to either labor or sexual services. Now, in your age group, let me tell you that one of the problems that we've seen in this area is runaway teenagers. You know, sometimes teenagers run away from home. And across the country, there are missing teenagers. There are lots of missing persons in America today. People who just vanish off the face of the earth. One day they're at a mall and they're disappeared. I'm sure many of you read the paper sometimes and you read about a 19-year-old girl or a 20-year-old girl or a teenager who just vanished and is never found again. What happens to these people? What's happened to the thousands of people who just vanish? A lot of it is involved with what we consider to be the problem of human trafficking. Runaway teenage girls, particularly, are often abducted and transported often outside their areas for the purpose of either labor or sexual services, to become prostitutes, to make money for the people, the criminals who are running these organizations. So it's a very serious problem for teenage girls particularly. And so in your sphere of influence among your peers, you ought to be aware of this problem in case there's any talk about that or if there's people approaching young teenagers. Also, adult women who are held against their will for prostitution and other services is another area that was addressed by these laws here in Pennsylvania. And I think Ms. Harhart mentioned that although it's a crime, I think that's heavily weighted with women being the victims. I think it's about 60% or so. There also are male victims of this crime as well, but women particularly. And then there's the problem of when people are promised jobs, again, mostly women from foreign countries, to come to the United States to get a job. You know, they promise jobs like waitressing and other jobs, and when they arrive here, they're forced into prostitution or other services. So this is a huge problem. And in Pennsylvania, there are various coalitions that have been established in Pittsburgh, in Philadelphia, and in York to combat human trafficking, and various task forces are being put together. Now, the legislature, as it always does, Julie, gave us the power as DAs and it's the Attorney General and the law enforcement community to enforce this law. But quite frankly, it's an area that usually requires multi-jurisdictions involved. Usually it's not just limited to a county, and so you'll find that in addition to the Pennsylvania law, we also have federal statutes that are passed down in Washington, a number of them, to deal with this. So you ask yourself, why is this done? It's a money operation. It's to make money. Most criminal enterprises, including gangs, the street gangs, the young people who are involved in drug sales, it's all about making money. And so when they passed the law in Pennsylvania, they made it very broad so that if you're using violence or threats of violence to force someone to do labor or sexual services, it could be a fraudulent scheme. It could be involved with debt collection, extorting money from people by force. It's a very, very broad statute. And as I said, the Pennsylvania legislature has made it a felony crime to do so. One last point that I want to make on this is that this is a problem that goes across into the international community, not just in the United States, but it's an international problem. So the FBI is very aware of this and often works with foreign governments as well to try to address this problem. And lastly, I think, Julie, the legislature recognized that one of the problems that we have with this problem of human trafficking is that we don't have a lot of data on it. We don't have a lot of collection of information about it yet. We're still developing that. And although it's been a long-standing problem, it is something that's recently have been addressed by the law enforcement community. So we're hopeful that with the laws that are in place, again, the two laws being involuntary servitude, labor or sexual services that are forced is a felony, and human trafficking, just assisting these organizations in any way can get you in trouble. So from your perspective as young students, you want to be aware of what the law is, and if you hear your friends or anyone talking about someone's enticed them to go somewhere or that they have a job from someplace, just be on the lookout and always be concerned and ask questions of the law enforcement community here in your jurisdiction or in your high school. So I hope that gives you a little summary of the law, and hopefully we'll be able to take some questions later on this.
Did you know that Violet Oakley was the first female artist to receive a large commission for artwork done in a United States Capitol building? In 1902, Joseph Houston, designer and architect for the 3rd Harrisburg Capitol building, commissioned Violet Oakley to paint murals for the governor's reception room. He believed that Oakley's contribution would add interest to the building and act as an encouragement of women of the state. Prior to beginning her work for the Capitol, Oakley set out to England to conduct research for her murals. Upon return, she decided to center her artwork on William Penn and the founding of Pennsylvania. Oakley made sure that Penn's ideals of justice and peace could be seen throughout her work. In 1906, she completed 13 murals titled The Founding of the State of Liberty Spiritual and was placed in sequential order around the governor's reception room. These murals were some of the first to be installed in the Capitol. When Edwin Austin Abbey, another artist for the Capitol, died in 1911, Oakley was offered another opportunity to create murals for the unfinished Senate and Supreme Court chambers. Her work on the Senate murals, including International Understanding, was completed by 1919. Oakley then completed the Supreme Court murals, including the Divine Law, by 1927. Oakley is said to be the principal artist for the Capitol, with a total of 43 murals on display. She remains one of the greatest muralists in the United States. Now you know.
Did you know that the state capitol is not only the epicenter of the Commonwealth's governing bodies, but was once home to 390 preserved Civil War flags? During the war, it was customary for each state to furnish their regiments in battle with flags representing their contribution to the Union Army. After the war, Pennsylvania's military department was responsible for collecting the flags, and in 1872, they were reverently housed in the Capitol. Following the completion of construction on the new Capitol building in 1914, the Civil War flags were moved to the Capitol Rotunda. They were kept untouched in custom-made flag cases until 1982, when the Capitol Preservation Committee initiated its Save the Flags project. Throughout the years, dust and long-term vertical display of the flags had begun to devastate the brittle silk fabric and painted designs. The flags were removed by local textile conservators and were repaired and preserved in storage units that protect the relics from light, dust, and excessive handling. Now you know.
When we went over the topic of human trafficking, I of course asked the kids any prior background information that they knew about it. And the only thing that they kind of came up with was the movie Taken, which to me is a Hollywood version that to me, I don't know how much it's based on reality. However, when we talked about the facts, we went through various websites, the kids almost seemed to have an air of shock and amazement that this is coming, this is actually happening, that this is occurring. And so that lends itself to the first question that I have. Because of the fact that this is such a growing crime and because it's such a huge moneymaker and it's widespread, do you think that there should be a mandated curriculum in the schools, both in the high school as well as the junior high, to teach kids about the ills of human trafficking?
Okay, well, first of all, I don't consider myself to be an education expert by any means. I think I would probably leave the final judgment of that to the people in the education business. But I will say that I think that this issue is a rising issue and an important issue for safety of young people. And I think, the common theme today of all the topics, you might sound like, well, geez, what do they all have in common? But what they all have in common are two things. One is they all constitute crimes, and two, the victims of these crimes are often aged high school students. So my feeling here is that it would probably be a useful idea to have some instruction on the topic, maybe as part of a health curriculum, health and welfare, as you would with the bullying and other issues that you perhaps touch upon in education. And as far as mandates go, I'm not big on mandates, but I'll leave that to the judgment of the legislature. But I do think that individual school districts and of course the state could make a judgment that there needs to be some information. I'm not saying that it has to be dominating a class or a curriculum, but I think some information to let kids know that this is happening. Because as you pointed out, when you showed them the information on websites, there was like, oh my God, I can't believe this is really going on. But it is going on. And as I said, unfortunately, girls seem to be more of the victims, young teenage girls, but not just girls. It's across both genders, but it is an important issue. So I think some instruction on it would be useful.
Okay. And then this actually would be more to Representative Harhart, although certainly, you can come in with a thought as well. But Act 145, which was the legislation that just came down in Pennsylvania, mentioned that probation and parole officers have to be trained, mandated training. My question is, do you think that, again, since we're with the students, we're with the kids, and since the average age of a person taken is 12, do you think that teachers should be mandated training as well, so that we would be much more of an expert in that field as well?
As I said too, I'm not into really mandating a school to do anything. Believe it or not, I do not believe in mandates. Giving them the option if they wanted to do that, absolutely. That's something that we haven't really discussed. I do not sit on education, so that could be being discussed in the education committee. I'm not sure, but I could find that out. But I think, it's important that everybody, teachers, students, superintendents, principals, they should all be aware of what is going on around them, and to report it and to be, more vigilant about it. So, to say, should we mandate it? I'm going to say no. But should you be vigilant about it? Absolutely vigilant about it. And then I will say that I think the school really should be the determining factor.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I do know, having researched this, it took me a while to find the resources that in my mind I felt familiar and comfortable with discussing. So I guess because of me going through various sources, that's what kind of led me to that question. Okay. The next question I have, according to the Polaris Project, they did trends, which I'm in love with this particular website. And it mentioned that 98% of human trafficking travels through the state of Kansas, which then led me to question whether or not people from Pennsylvania, if we happen to know this, are people from Pennsylvania, are they being trafficked to the West Coast? Or are they being, do they travel up to the East Coast? Or Do you know that what exactly the citizens of our state, where they're going?
It's a very good question. It's difficult to answer because of the fact that we don't have a lot of statistics on this yet. But my own personal experiences with respect to this issue in Lehigh Valley is that victims are going west to California. And the idea is to get people as far away as possible from their normal surroundings. You got to understand, human trafficking is to isolate people, to isolate them into an unfamiliar location so that they don't run away, and they're sort of dependent on the people who are holding them after some period of time. It is really a kidnapping, a hostage situation in many ways. And we've had one or two cases over the years where young girls from the Lehigh Valley have ended up out in in California and in those areas. But they want to get you away from home. They want to get you away as far as possible from home. And so that's it. But I think that as we develop more information, as I said, this law is not that old. We're going to have a better handle on that.
Okay, great. My next question then, you had mentioned the penalty, that it's a second class as well as a first class penalty. If a kid is taken from Pennsylvania and transported to California, are there also, each state would represent another charge?
Well, essentially what we would be dealing with is interstate trafficking, yes. And we have federal statutes that deal with that particular issue. As I indicated, we have a number of United States federal statutes that deals with sex trafficking of children, trafficking with respect to slavery or involuntary servitude. So once you go beyond state lines, you're now in the federal jurisdiction, and it's more likely that you'll be prosecuted federally than in each state. Although the states still retain jurisdiction, a lot of times law enforcement will defer to the federal authorities, and many times that's because the penalties are harsher with the federal statutes when you're dealing with interstate trafficking.
Okay. Are convicted human traffickers required to register like sex offenders?
We don't have any registry in Pennsylvania that I'm aware of with respect to this particular crime.
And
no.
Is that something that they may consider?
I don't. I can tell you from the standpoint of the Pennsylvania DA's Association, I'm not aware of any discussions on that at all at the present time.
And do you think that would be beneficial at all? Or?
Well, I don't know, because whenever we're talking about legislation, I think that it requires a slow process to take testimony, et cetera. With sex offenders, there was a feeling that a lot of these people are released from prison and they're back in their neighborhoods, and they're near schools and they're near school buses, et cetera. And so there was a strong feeling that the sex offenders needed to be registered so that, because they're going to be back in the society again and they're going to be living in your neighborhood. I don't know whether they've made that legislative judgment yet with respect to this particular crime, because these are usually transients. It's large transnational organizations many times, not just neighborhood people who decided to assault some young child in their neighborhood. It's sort of a different ballgame. But I would say that it's something that might be studied.
So, which is another question. So basically, this is a network, not individual people who traffic. In
my
general
experience, that has been the case. It's a group of people that it's a criminal organization designed to make money and profit. Now, there are cases, there's always the exception to every rule, and there are individuals who do this on their own that are not part of it. But a lot of it is a network to transport people across the country or out of the country, et cetera. But again, criminal act independently. They act as part of a group. There's no set model, but a lot of it is a organized crime element.
Okay. And do we, based upon your experience, is there, and I know that they're highly manipulative, do we have a personality profile of I'm going to use this loosely, a typical human trafficker?
Well, I would say that I don't know if there's a typical profile. My guess is that we're probably dealing with what we consider in law enforcement is a criminal profile, which is usually antisocial personality disorder. The people have that. They're anti-society. They don't follow the rules. But this is a money business. It's an exploitation business. So it's driven by a criminal mentality that how can I make money, and having no regard for human beings and the dignity of the person. I think that would probably qualify under a number of psychological disorders, but what we see in law enforcement is antisocial personality disorder, because it covers a wide spectrum of behavior that is antisocial and without regard for the law, without regard for human dignity. We see this in a lot of people who commit sexual crimes as well.
Okay. And then, I just lost my train. We know that, again, from Polaris Project, that the places where they're now putting the hotline numbers for in case there might be some type of human trafficking, and one of the largest ones happens to be hotels and motels, as well as the way in which they're luring people is not through kidnapping so much as trying to get romantically involved with the person and then gradually getting them there. Do we know in the Lehigh Valley if that's been the case in the cases you've prosecuted?
I can't answer that question. I really don't know if that's the case. I am aware of the fact that there's a lot of these online operations that entice people for dating services and things of that nature. In other words, try to get people into the trade. You could be an escort, you can make lots of money. And some of the young girls contact these numbers thinking that they're going to be a model or something. And when they get there at a hotel, and they set these up in hotels, because they can get out of a hotel rather quickly under an assumed name, they find out that it's really to do porn or to end up being a pimp for some prostitute. So that's the reason why hotels and motels often have these types of resources now, because that's where they operate from. And we've seen that here in Lehigh Valley of hotel operations. And motels, usually fly-by-nights, usually not the Waldorf.
Yeah. And then
We have one in Pennsylvania.
the last question I have, and you may have answered it, I'm not 100% certain, based upon your experience in the cases that you have, in your mind, what is the best or most effective way? If you're, say, I'm a 12-year-old girl, I'm on the internet, I have a cell phone, I'm interacting in my own society. What is the absolute best and most effective way to avoid being human trafficked?
Well, I think the first thing is, that the education, what we're doing today, is to get the word out about that it's out there, because a lot of kids don't know it's out there, and a lot of adults don't know it's out there.
Correct.
And second thing is that, your closest confidant, whether it's your parents, if you suspect that someone's trying to lure you into a situation, whether it's your parents, the resource police officer in your school that you trust, somebody that you trust, an older person that can get to the bottom of it. Don't let yourself be lured into a situation where you really don't know what's going on. And in order to avoid that, you have to have knowledge. And that's why I think it's good for the schools to at least touch upon this topic in some fashion. Whether it's mandatory or not, it doesn't hurt to inform the young people of our community about this danger.
That's all the time we have for this month's program. If you would like to know more about what you've just seen, or if I can help you with any state government-related matters, please contact me at my district office or through my website or Facebook. That information will be on your screen in a moment. Thanks for watching, and please join me next time for Legislative Report.